At the reading of the will, my cousin shouted, "That is my money." The mahogany conference room felt suffocating as Marcus drummed his manicured fingers against the polished table, checking his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. When is this going to start? I have a golf appointment at 3. I squeezed the tissue in my lap tighter, still barely processing that Grandma Rose had been gone for 2 weeks. The funeral flowers were probably just now wilting in the cemetery, and here was my cousin treating her while reading like an inconvenience, interrupting his country club schedule. The lawyer said 1:30, Marcus, I said quietly, glancing around at the other family members scattered throughout the room. Aunt Linda sat rigid in her chair, Uncle Tom kept clearing his throat nervously, and my parents exchanged worried glances near the window. Marcus leaned back in his chair with that smug expression I'd grown to hate over the years. Well, Sarah, I suppose we'll all find out soon enough how Grandma Rose really felt about family loyalty. He straightened his designer tie. Some of us actually visited her every week, took care of her finances, made sure she wasn't being taken advantage of by certain people. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I bit my tongue, remembering how many times I'd driven the 4 hours from my teaching job in Portland to spend weekends with Grandma, only to find Marcus already there, whispering in her ear about my irresponsible lifestyle or how I only came around when I needed something. The conference room door opened with a soft click, and Harold Pembroke, Grandma's lawyer for 37 years, entered carrying a thick manila folder and what looked like a sealed envelope. His silver hair was perfectly combed, but his usually warm eyes held a gravity that made my stomach clench. Thank you all for being here, Mr. Pembroke said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. I know this is a difficult time for everyone. Rose spoke of all of you often, and with great love. Marcus shifted forward eagerly. Harold, we appreciate the sentiment, but could we just get to the important parts? I'm assuming there are property transfers to handle, and I'll need to coordinate with my financial advisor about the investment accounts. Marcus, Aunt Linda hissed, her face reddening. Show some respect. What? We're all thinking it, Marcus shot back. Grandma Rose accumulated substantial assets. The house is worth at least $800,000, plus her investment portfolio. Someone has to be responsible for managing it properly. Mr. Pembroke adjusted his glasses and opened the folder with deliberate slowness. Yes, well, Rose was very specific about her wishes. Her estate, valued at approximately $2.3 million, has been distributed according to her explicit instructions, which she updated just 6 months ago. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Marcus's eyes gleamed with barely contained excitement, while I found myself thinking about how Grandma Rose always said money was just paper. What mattered was how you used it to take care of the people you loved. Now then, Mr. Pembroke continued, pulling out the official documents. Let's begin with the reading of Rose Elizabeth Morrison's last will and testament, dated March 15, 2024. Marcus straightened his shoulders like a king preparing to accept his crown. I closed my eyes and tried to remember Grandma's laugh instead of the vulture-like anticipation radiating from the man sitting 3 feet away from me. Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat and began reading in his measured, professional tone. I, Rose Elizabeth Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Marcus was practically vibrating with anticipation, his leg bouncing under the table like he was about to jump up and start planning renovations on Grandma's Victorian house. I noticed he'd already pulled out his phone, probably ready to text his real estate agent. To my dear daughter Linda Morrison Hayes, I leave my collection of first edition novels and the sum of $50,000, knowing how much you treasured our book club discussions. Aunt Linda pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She remembered, she whispered. To my son Thomas Morrison, I leave my late husband's workshop tools and the sum of $50,000, with hopes that you'll finally build that gazebo you always talked about. Uncle Tom's shoulders shook as he nodded, probably remembering all those Saturday afternoons he'd spent with Grandpa in that cluttered garage, learning to use a wood plane and dreaming of future projects. Marcus's expression tightened slightly, but he still looked confident. Basic family gifts, he was probably thinking. The real money would come next. Mr. Pembroke continued through smaller bequests, $20,000 to the local library, $15,000 to the animal shelter where Grandma volunteered, $10,000 to her church. With each donation, Marcus's jaw clenched a little tighter. That's already over $100,000, he muttered under his breath. Harold, can we skip to the primary beneficiaries? Marcus, my mother snapped. Let him finish. Mr. Pembroke shot Marcus a disapproving look over his reading glasses. To my grandsons Michael and David Morrison, I leave the sum of $25,000 each for their college educations. My younger cousins, Uncle Tom's boys, looked stunned. Michael was starting his junior year at Oregon State, and David was still in high school. That money would change their lives. And now, Mr. Pembroke said, his voice taking on a strange tone I couldn't quite identify, we come to the disposition of the remainder of the estate. Marcus sat up straighter, smoothing his hair. I caught him practicing his surprised but grateful expression in the reflection of the conference room window. To my grandson Marcus James Morrison, Mr. Pembroke read, and Marcus's face broke into a triumphant smile, I leave my grandmother's pearl necklace and the sum of $5,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus blinked rapidly, like he'd been slapped. I'm sorry, what? There must be some mistake. 5,000? What about the house? The investment accounts? Mr. Pembroke ignored him and continued reading. To my beloved granddaughter Sarah Catherine Morrison, who showed me that true love cannot be purchased or manipulated, I leave the remainder of my entire estate, including my home at 1247 Maple Street, all investment accounts, savings accounts, and personal property not otherwise specified herein. The total value is approximately $2.1 million. The folder slipped from my numb fingers and scattered papers across the floor. The room started spinning, and I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling over. What? Marcus exploded, jumping to his feet so violently his chair crashed backward. That is my money. I'm the one who took care of her. I visited every week. I managed her finances. This is impossible. But Mr. Pembroke wasn't finished. He picked up the sealed envelope with deliberate care. And Sarah, he said gently, your grandmother left you this letter, with specific instructions that it be read aloud to the entire family. My hands trembled as I stared at the envelope with my name written in Grandma Rose's careful cursive. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it contained secrets that might shatter what was left of our family. Read it, Marcus demanded, his face flushed red with fury. I want to hear what lies she. Sit down, Marcus, Uncle Tom commanded with more authority than I'd ever heard from him. Let Sarah decide. But Mr. Pembroke was already carefully opening the envelope. Actually, Rose was very specific. She wanted this read aloud immediately following the will, regardless of anyone's objections. He unfolded 2 pages of Grandma's distinctive handwriting. She said, and I quote, "The truth has been hidden long enough." Marcus sank back into his chair, his confidence finally cracking. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain, almost afraid. Mr. Pembroke began reading in his steady voice, "My dearest family, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and you are probably wondering why I made the decisions I did. The truth is, I have been watching and listening more carefully than any of you realized." I felt my mother's hand find mine under the table as the lawyer continued. "Marcus, my dear boy, you spent 3 years telling me that Sarah only visited when she needed money. You said she complained about having to drive from Portland, that she called me a burden to her friends. You warned me that she was irresponsible with finances and would waste any inheritance on frivolous things." The room was dead silent except for Marcus's labored breathing. "But what you didn't know, Marcus, is that Sarah never asked me for a single dollar. Not when her car broke down and she took 3 buses to visit me. Not when her school district cut funding and she spent her own money on classroom supplies. Not when she had to choose between paying her student loans and taking time off work to sit with me during my chemotherapy." My vision blurred. I'd never told anyone about the chemotherapy visits, how I'd held Grandma's hand while she dozed between treatments, or how she'd made me promise not to worry the family. Furthermore, Marcus, you told me that Sarah said my house was old and creepy and that I should sell it and move into assisted living so I wouldn't be everyone's problem anymore. That's not, Marcus started, but Uncle Tom grabbed his arm. The truth is, Mr. Pembroke continued reading, Sarah spent her last visit helping me organize my recipe cards and asking if she could frame some of my old photographs. She told me the house felt like a hug every time she walked in, and she hoped someday she might have a kitchen window like mine where she could watch the seasons change. I remembered that conversation. We'd been making apple pie, and Grandma had seemed so happy when I'd asked about her photo albums. But Marcus, what hurt me most was discovering the financial discrepancies. When my bank called about unusual large withdrawals from my savings account, withdrawals that happened during your weekly visits, I asked my friend Dorothy's son, who works at the bank, to look into it quietly. Marcus went completely white. Aunt Linda gasped, and my father leaned forward in his chair. Over the past 18 months, you transferred $127,000 from my accounts to yours, Marcus. Always in amounts just under the reporting threshold. Always with forged signatures I had Dorothy's son verify against my real signature cards. He stole from her, my mother whispered in horror. Marcus shot to his feet again. She's lying. She was confused, she had dementia symptoms. I was helping manage her money, she asked me to. But Mr. Pembroke held up his hand and kept reading. I have documentation of every fraudulent transfer, which I have shared with Harold and instructed him to turn over to the appropriate authorities after this reading. The envelope crinkled in Mr. Pembroke's hands as he reached the final paragraph, and I realized our family was about to fracture in ways we might never be able to repair. The letter wasn't finished. Mr. Pembroke's voice grew softer as he read the final section, and somehow that made Grandma Rose's words cut even deeper. Sarah, my darling girl, I need you to know that I was never fooled. When Marcus told me you complained about the drive to visit me, I remembered how you always brought those terrible gas station coffees because you left Portland at 5 a.m. to spend full weekends with me. When you said you called me a burden, I thought about how you rearranged your entire teaching schedule to drive me to doctor appointments without being asked. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming, but I hadn't made a sound. Across the table, Marcus was staring at his hands, his usual swagger completely deflated. I let Marcus think his manipulation was working because I needed to see how far he would go. I needed to protect not just my money, but all of you. The bank statements I discovered showed he had been researching how to gain power of attorney over my finances. Harold has copies of the emails Marcus sent to Elder Care Services, claiming I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. Jesus Christ, Marcus, Uncle Tom breathed. You tried to have her declared incompetent? Marcus's head snapped up. She was making bad decisions. Giving money to those scam charities, talking about buying a new car at 86 years old. Someone had to protect her from herself. Those scam charities were the Literacy Foundation and the Children's Hospital, Aunt Linda said, her voice shaking with rage. And she wanted to buy a car because you kept telling her she was too old to drive, even though her doctor said she was fine. Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat and continued. Sarah, I'm leaving you this inheritance not as a reward, but as a responsibility. You once told me you wished you could start a scholarship fund for kids who couldn't afford college, kids like your students whose families work 2 jobs but still can't save enough for their children's futures. I had told her that. Last Christmas, when I'd been grading papers for my seniors and getting heartbroken reading their college application essays about choosing between their dreams and their family's financial reality. Use this money to build something that lasts longer than any of us will. Create opportunities for children who deserve them. And Marcus. Mr. Pembroke paused, glancing at my cousin who was now slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. The lawyer folded the letter carefully and reached for another document from his folder. Before we conclude, I should inform everyone that Rose filed a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services 3 weeks before her passing. She also provided the district attorney's office with evidence of financial exploitation. Marcus, you should expect to hear from Detective Richardson within the next few days. This is insane, Marcus whispered, but his fight was gone. She loved me. I was taking care of her. You were stealing from her, I said, finding my voice for the first time since the reading began. You were lying about me, manipulating her, and planning to have her declared incompetent so you could control her money legally. Marcus looked around the room desperately, searching for any sympathetic face. Linda, you know me. I wouldn't. I was trying to protect the family assets. What if Sarah had influenced her? What if? Stop. Aunt Linda's voice was ice cold. Just stop talking. Mr. Pembroke was gathering his papers, but I could barely focus on anything except the weight of what had just happened. Grandma Rose had left me $2.1 million. Marcus had been stealing from her for over a year. My entire family was staring at me like I might have answers I definitely didn't have. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized I was now rich enough to change lives, starting with my own. The silence stretched on until Marcus suddenly straightened up, his desperation transforming into something that looked almost like his old arrogance. You know what? Fine. Contest the will. That's what I'll do. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Harold, I want to formally contest this will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. Sarah obviously manipulated a sick, elderly woman into changing her will. Look at the timing, updated just 6 months ago? Right when Grandma was getting confused and forgetful? Marcus, she wasn't confused, I said, but he was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling my lawyer right now. Jim Patterson handles estate litigation, and he's going to tear this apart. Marcus started dialing with trembling fingers. There's no way a jury will believe that Grandma Rose suddenly decided to give everything to Sarah after 32 years of me being the responsible grandson. Mr. Pembroke adjusted his glasses calmly. Marcus, I should mention that Rose anticipated you might take this route. That's why she insisted on several additional measures. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Rose underwent comprehensive cognitive testing in February of this year. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist, administered a full neuropsychological evaluation specifically to document her mental competency. The results show Rose scoring in the 95th percentile for her age group. Marcus's phone call went to voicemail, and I watched his face crumble as Mr. Pembroke continued. Additionally, Rose asked me to videotape her will signing and a detailed interview about her decision-making process. She spoke for 47 minutes about her reasons for the inheritance distribution, citing specific incidents and dates. Would you like me to play that video now? There's a video? Aunt Linda asked. Rose was very thorough. She also had 3 witnesses present during the signing, including Dr. Chen and Father Martinez from St. Catherine's. All of them will testify that Rose was completely lucid and adamant about her choices. Marcus sank back into his chair, his phone dropping onto the table. She planned this. She actually planned all of this. What I don't understand, my mother said quietly, is why she didn't just confront you directly, Marcus. Why the elaborate setup? Mr. Pembroke pulled out another document. Actually, she did confront him. Rose saved copies of several text messages she sent to Marcus in January, asking about the missing money. His responses are illuminating. He handed me a printed conversation, and I read it aloud with growing horror. Marcus wrote back, Grandma, you're getting confused again. We talked about this. I'm moving your money to better investment accounts to help you. Don't you remember? Maybe it's time to talk to Dr. Peterson about increasing your memory medication. He was gaslighting her, Uncle Tom said, his voice thick with disgust. Making her think she was losing her mind to cover up theft. The next message, I continued reading, Marcus wrote, I'm worried about you. You've been asking about money I never touched. Should I call Sarah and tell her you're having confusion episodes? I don't want to worry her, but maybe you need more help than I can give. Marcus buried his face in his hands. I was protecting her assets. She was talking about giving thousands to that literacy program, and her property taxes were increasing. I was going to pay it all back once she was gone and the estate was settled. You mean once you inherited it and didn't have to pay it back at all, I said. Sarah's right. Mr. Pembroke's voice was stern. Rose specifically mentioned in her video interview that Marcus had been pressuring her to change her will in his favor for months. She has documentation of him bringing pre-drafted will amendments to family dinners, telling her that leaving money to multiple beneficiaries would create tax problems. My father spoke up for the first time. How much did you actually steal, Marcus? It wasn't stealing, Marcus insisted weakly. I had her verbal permission for some of those transfers. And I used the money for legitimate expenses, her house maintenance, property taxes, medical bills. Mr. Pembroke consulted another document. According to the bank records Rose requested, $89,000 of the transferred funds went directly to Marcus's personal credit card payments and car loan. The remaining $38,000 was used for what Marcus described to the bank as estate planning services. Estate planning services? Aunt Linda's voice was deadly quiet. Marcus hired a lawyer to draft documents that would make him Rose's financial power of attorney and healthcare proxy. When Rose refused to sign them, he told her they were updated insurance forms and tried to get her to sign without reading them carefully. The room felt like it was closing in. I stared at my cousin, this man I'd known my entire life, who used to build blanket forts with me during family reunions, and realized I'd never really known him at all. Marcus looked up with red-rimmed eyes. I need that money, okay? My business is failing, Jennifer wants a divorce, and my mortgage is underwater. Grandma Rose had more money than she could ever spend. I thought she'd understand eventually. So you decided to steal it and make her think she was going crazy instead of just asking for help, I said. Would she have given it to me if I'd asked? Marcus shot back desperately. The answer hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone in the room. No. She wouldn't have. And now I understood why. The weight of everyone staring at me was becoming unbearable. $2.1 million. The number kept echoing in my head like a broken record, and I couldn't make it feel real. 3 hours ago, I was a 4th-grade teacher worried about affording new tires for my Honda Civic. Now I was apparently wealthy enough to change lives. Sarah, Mr. Pembroke said gently, there are some practical matters we need to discuss. The house will need to be secured, and there are several investment accounts that require immediate attention. I nodded numbly, trying to focus on his words instead of the way Marcus was staring at me like I'd personally robbed him. I don't want it, I heard myself say. The room went dead silent. What? My mother asked. I don't want the money. Not like this. I gestured around the table. Look at what it's done to our family. Grandma Rose is gone, Marcus stole from her, and now everyone's looking at me like I'm either a saint or a criminal. Marcus perked up slightly. If Sarah doesn't want her inheritance, then legally it would go to the next beneficiary, right, Harold? That would be me. Absolutely not, Uncle Tom snapped. You think we're going to reward your theft? Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat. Actually, Rose anticipated this possibility as well. If Sarah were to refuse the inheritance, it would go to the Portland Public Education Foundation to establish the scholarship fund Rose mentions in her letter. Marcus would receive nothing additional. Of course she did, Marcus muttered bitterly. She thought of everything, didn't she? Made sure I'd be completely screwed no matter what happened. You screwed yourself, Aunt Linda said coldly. The moment you forged her signature on those bank transfers. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see it was from my principal, asking if I'd be back in time for parent-teacher conferences next week. The normalcy of it hit me like a slap. While I was sitting in this mahogany-paneled room discussing millions of dollars, my fourth graders were probably at recess, arguing over who got to use the good swing set. I need time to think, I said, standing up abruptly. This is all too much. Sarah, wait. Marcus's voice was desperate now. Before you make any decisions, can we talk? Just the two of us? Please? I don't think that's a good idea, my father said firmly. 5 minutes, Marcus pleaded. Sarah, we grew up together. We used to be close. Just give me 5 minutes to explain. Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. 5 minutes. In the hallway. Mr. Pembroke looked concerned. Sarah, you're under no obligation to. It's okay, I said, even though it definitely wasn't. The hallway outside the conference room was lined with oil paintings of stern-faced lawyers from decades past. Marcus leaned against the wall, and for a moment he looked like the scared kid who used to hide behind Grandma Rose's rocking chair during thunderstorms. I never meant for it to go this far, he said quietly. When I took that first $5,000, I really was planning to pay it back. My consulting business was just having a rough quarter, and Jennifer was pregnant with our second baby. You have a second baby? We lost him, Marcus said, his voice cracking. Jennifer miscarried at 7 months. That was when everything started falling apart. The medical bills, the therapy costs, Jennifer barely getting out of bed for months. I was drowning, Sarah. My anger wavered slightly. I hadn't known about the pregnancy, the loss. Our family had grown so fractured over the years that major life events happened in isolation. I'm sorry, I said. I had no idea you and Jennifer were going through that. Grandma Rose didn't know either. I was too proud to tell anyone. Marcus wiped his eyes. When I saw how much money she had just sitting in savings accounts, earning practically nothing, I thought I could borrow some and invest it properly. Turn it into more money for everyone. By forging her signatures? I was going to tell her eventually. Once I'd proven I could make it work. Marcus straightened up, and I caught a glimpse of his old manipulation tactics creeping back in. Sarah, you could share the inheritance. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Keep half, give me half. We could both honor Grandma's memory in our own ways. Marcus, you stole from her. You made her think she was losing her mind. I panicked when she started asking questions. I didn't know what else to do. His voice rose, then dropped back to a whisper as footsteps echoed from another office down the hall. But Sarah, think about this logically. What are you actually going to do with $2 million? You're a teacher. You live in a one-bedroom apartment and drive a car with 200,000 miles on it. This money could destroy your life just as easily as it could save it. Something cold settled in my stomach as I realized Marcus was probably right about that part. I had no idea how to manage that kind of wealth. I'd never owned stocks, never had more than $3,000 in my savings account at one time. Just consider it, Marcus pressed on. We could work together. I have experience with investments, estate planning, tax implications. We could be partners instead of enemies. Before I could respond, the conference room door opened and my father stepped out. Time's up, he said firmly. Sarah, Mr. Pembroke needs to go over some additional paperwork with you. As we walked back into the room, Marcus grabbed my arm gently. Think about what I said. Family should help family. But as I sat back down at that polished table, all I could think about was Grandma Rose sitting alone in her kitchen, wondering if her mind was failing her, while the grandson she trusted was systematically stealing her security and her peace of mind. The money felt heavier than ever. Back in the conference room, Mr. Pembroke was organizing a stack of documents that looked thick enough to choke a horse. Sarah, there are several time-sensitive matters we need to address. The house insurance needs to be transferred to your name within 30 days, and there are investment accounts that require new beneficiary designations. I stared at the papers, the words blurring together. How much experience do you need to manage this kind of money? I mean, what if I mess it up? That's what financial advisors are for, he said kindly. Rose actually worked with Morrison Financial Group downtown, no relation to your family, just coincidence. They've been managing her portfolio for 15 years. Marcus, who had been unusually quiet since our hallway conversation, suddenly perked up. Actually, Harold, I've been working with Patterson and Associates on some investment strategies. They could handle Sarah's transition much more efficiently than Morrison Financial. Patterson and Associates? Mr. Pembroke frowned. Isn't that the firm that handles your personal investments, Marcus? Yes, but they're excellent. Jim Patterson helped me restructure my business loans and consolidate my debt. He could do the same for Sarah, make sure she's getting optimal returns. Uncle Tom leaned forward. Marcus, are you seriously trying to get your hands on financial control of Sarah's inheritance right now? I'm trying to help her avoid the mistakes I made, Marcus shot back. Sarah, you have no idea what kind of sharks are out there waiting to take advantage of someone who suddenly inherits this much money. At least I'm family. Your family who stole $127,000 from our grandmother, Aunt Linda said icily. Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat diplomatically. Sarah, you're under no pressure to make any investment decisions today. Rose's current portfolio is quite stable, and Morrison Financial has been managing it conservatively. You have time to research your options. But as he spoke, my phone started buzzing with text messages. I glanced down to see notifications from numbers I didn't recognize. Is your number listed publicly somewhere? My mother asked, noticing my confusion. I opened the messages, and my stomach dropped. Someone named Janet from Pacific Northwest Financial wants to discuss optimizing my new assets. Another one from Columbia River Investment Group congratulating me on my inheritance and offering a free consultation. Mr. Pembroke's expression darkened. That's highly irregular. This meeting was supposed to be confidential. Marcus had gone pale. I didn't. I mean, I might have mentioned to Jim Patterson that there was a family will reading today, but I didn't give him any details. You told your financial advisor about Grandma's will reading? I asked incredulously. Just in passing. He was asking why I needed to reschedule our appointment. Marcus pulled out his own phone. But look, Sarah, I'm getting weird calls too. Someone from Willamette Valley Estate Planning called me 20 minutes ago asking about opportunities for wealth preservation strategies. Uncle Tom stood up abruptly. Harold, how many people knew about the contents of this will? Just myself and my secretary, who prepared the documents. And Rose, obviously. Mr. Pembroke was scrolling through something on his tablet. But wills become public record after they're filed with the probate court, which happens automatically after the reading. How public? I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. Anyone can access probate filings. Estate value, beneficiary names, asset distribution, it's all public information unless there are specific privacy seals in place. He paused. Rose didn't request privacy seals because she wanted transparency, given the irregularities she'd discovered. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a local news station. Hi, Sarah. We'd love to interview you about your grandmother's generous scholarship wishes. Available this evening? Oh no, I whispered. Marcus was staring at his own phone in horror. There's already a fucking news article. Local teacher inherits $2.1 million, plans educational scholarship. How do they know about the scholarship? That was in Grandma's private letter. Mr. Pembroke's face had gone completely white. My secretary. Margaret has worked here for 12 years, but she's been having financial difficulties lately. Her husband lost his job last month. You think she leaked the details? My father asked. I'm going to call her right now. Mr. Pembroke reached for his office phone. This is a massive breach of client confidentiality. But I was barely listening anymore. My phone was ringing, actually ringing, with a call from someone named Derek at Oregon Education Weekly. When I declined the call, it immediately started ringing again from a different number. Sarah Morrison? This is Channel 8 News. We understand you're planning to honor your grandmother with a scholarship fund. Could we get a brief statement? I hung up and turned off my phone, but the damage was already done. In the space of 20 minutes, I'd gone from being a private person to being a public news story about inherited wealth and educational philanthropy. This is exactly what I was warning you about, Marcus said grimly. The moment people know you have money, they never leave you alone. Financial advisors, reporters, long-lost friends who suddenly need loans. It's going to destroy your normal life. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized my manipulative, lying, thieving cousin might actually be right about something. The inheritance was about to become the worst thing that had ever happened to me. The conference room had become a fishbowl. Through the tall windows, I could see people gathering on the sidewalk below, some with cameras. My phone, even turned off, felt like it was burning a hole in my purse. Harold, my father said urgently, is there a back exit to this building? Mr. Pembroke was still on the phone with his secretary, his voice growing sharper by the minute. Margaret, I don't care what your financial situation is. You violated attorney-client privilege. Yes, I understand Trevor needs surgery, but... No, you cannot claim this falls under public interest disclosure. He hung up and turned to us with a grim expression. She sold the story to Channel 8 for $1,500. Complete details of the will, the letter contents, everything. She says her son needs medical treatment they can't afford. Jesus Christ, Uncle Tom muttered. Even the lawyer's office is falling apart over money. Marcus was pacing by the windows, occasionally peeking through the blinds. There are at least a dozen people down there now. Someone's setting up what looks like professional camera equipment. He turned back to me, his face pale. Sarah, this is going to follow you everywhere. Your school, your apartment, the grocery store. These people don't just go away. Maybe I should just give a statement, I said weakly. Tell them I need privacy to grieve? That'll make it worse, Marcus insisted. Trust me, I've seen what happens when business deals go public. The more you try to control the narrative, the more they dig. They'll start interviewing your neighbors, your students' parents, your ex-boyfriends. My mother's face went white. Oh honey, what about your job? Principal Martinez is going to have reporters calling the school. The reality hit me like a freight train. I couldn't go back to teaching with this circus following me. My classroom was supposed to be a safe space for kids, not ground zero for media attention about inherited millions. Parents would either treat me like a celebrity or assume I no longer cared about my students now that I was rich. There's something else, Mr. Pembroke said reluctantly. Margaret also mentioned that she'd been contacted by someone claiming to be a private investigator yesterday, asking questions about Rose's estate. She assumed it was routine background checking, but given the timing. Marcus stopped pacing. What kind of questions? Specifically about the inheritance amounts and whether there were any challenges to the will's validity. Mr. Pembroke consulted his notes. The investigator paid her $300 for basic information about today's meeting. Someone hired a PI before the will was even read? Aunt Linda asked. Marcus's phone started ringing. He glanced at the screen and his face went ashen. It's Jennifer. She's probably seeing the news coverage. He answered with a shaky voice. Jen? Yeah, I'm still at the lawyer's office. No, it's not, it's complicated. I could hear Jennifer's voice through the phone, high-pitched and agitated, though I couldn't make out the words. I know we needed the money, Marcus said quietly. No, Sarah got most of it. Jennifer, I can't talk about this right now, there are reporters. His voice cracked. Yes, they probably know about the investigation too. He hung up and slumped against the wall. Jennifer saw a news ticker that mentioned potential elder abuse charges pending. Her mother is threatening to file for emergency custody of Emma if I get arrested. For the first time since the reading began, I felt genuinely sorry for Marcus. Whatever he'd done, his daughter didn't deserve to be caught in this mess. Harold, I said suddenly, what happens if I refuse the inheritance right now? Today, before this gets any worse? The money would transfer to the Portland Public Education Foundation as Rose specified. But Sarah, you can't make this decision based on media pressure. That's exactly what your grandmother was trying to prevent. Grandma Rose couldn't have predicted this circus, I protested. Mr. Pembroke gave me a sad smile. Actually, she did. That's why she wanted everything handled transparently. She knew money this significant would eventually become public knowledge. She said, and I quote, "I'd rather Sarah face the chaos honestly than spend years hiding from shadows." Outside, someone was shouting questions at the building, though I couldn't make out the words. My phone, still turned off, somehow felt heavier in my purse than Grandma's entire inheritance. A sharp knock on the conference room door made everyone jump. Mr. Pembroke's assistant poked her head in, looking frazzled. "Harold, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a Detective Richardson here to see Marcus Morrison. He says it's regarding an ongoing investigation." The color drained completely from Marcus's face. "Already? They said it would be a few days." "They probably expedited it once the media got involved," Mr. Pembroke said grimly. "Public attention tends to accelerate these processes." Detective Richardson turned out to be a surprisingly young woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She stepped into the room carrying a manila folder and surveying our family with professional detachment. "Mr. Morrison," she addressed Marcus directly, "I need you to come with me to answer some questions about financial transactions involving Rose Morrison between January 2023 and March 2024. "Am I under arrest?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "Not at this time. But I strongly recommend you contact an attorney before we speak." Detective Richardson's gaze swept across the rest of us. "I may need to interview other family members as well, but Mr. Morrison is my primary concern today." Marcus stood on shaky legs, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. The arrogant confidence he'd worn like armor for years had completely evaporated, leaving behind a scared man who suddenly looked every one of his 32 years. "Sarah," he said desperately, "please don't let them destroy our family over this. Whatever you decide about the money, remember that Emma is innocent. She doesn't deserve to lose her father and her inheritance because I made mistakes." Detective Richardson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Morrison, I'd recommend saving those conversations for when you have legal representation present." As they headed toward the door, Marcus turned back one last time. "Jim Patterson. My financial advisor. He's the one who gave me the ideas about the power of attorney documents. He said elderly people need protection from their own bad decisions. Maybe you should be investigating him too." The detective made a note but didn't respond. Within moments, they were gone, leaving the rest of us sitting in stunned silence around the conference table. "Well," Uncle Tom said finally, "I guess that answers the question about whether Marcus was working alone." Mr. Pembroke was gathering his documents with renewed urgency. "Sarah, given these developments, I think we need to expedite some decisions. The media attention is only going to intensify once word gets out about the criminal investigation." My phone, despite being turned off, seemed to mock me from inside my purse. Outside, the crowd was definitely growing larger. I could hear car doors slamming and what sounded like news vans pulling up. "What kind of expedited decisions?" I asked, though part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. "The house needs to be secured immediately. Rose's personal belongings need to be cataloged and protected. And frankly, you need somewhere safe to stay while this media storm blows over." He paused, consulting his notes. "Rose actually anticipated this too. She arranged for a property management company to handle the house transition, and she set aside funds for you to stay at the Riverside and under an assumed name if necessary." "An assumed name?" My mother looked horrified. "Harold, you're talking like Sarah's entering witness protection. Mrs. Morrison, your daughter just inherited $2.1 million in a case involving potential elder abuse, with a family member being questioned by police and media camped outside my office. This situation is unprecedented in my 37 years of practice." Aunt Linda was staring out the window at the growing crowd. "There's a woman down there with a sign that says teachers don't deserve millions. Who makes a protest sign that fast?" The weight of it all crashed down on me like a collapsing building. 6 hours ago, I'd been worried about grading spelling tests and figuring out how to afford new classroom supplies. Now I was hiding in a lawyer's office while strangers with cameras debated whether I deserved the money my grandmother had left me, and my cousin was being questioned by police for stealing from an elderly woman. I thought about Grandma Rose's letter, about her dreams of scholarship funds and helping children. But mostly, I thought about how she'd died believing her family was fractured beyond repair, never knowing if her final gamble to expose the truth would bring us together or tear us apart forever. Looking around at my family's shocked faces, I was starting to think she might not have liked the answer. The property management company turned out to be run by a woman named Carol Stevens who looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate magazine, perfectly styled gray hair, immaculate navy suit, and the kind of calm efficiency that probably came from dealing with crisis situations regularly. "Ms. Morrison," she said, settling into the chair Detective Richardson had vacated 20 minutes earlier, "your grandmother was very specific about the protocols for this transition. She anticipated that you might need immediate relocation assistance." I stared at her, still trying to process that Grandma Rose had planned for me to go into hiding. "How specific are we talking?" Carol opened a leather portfolio and pulled out several documents. She arranged for a 2-week stay at the Riverside and under the name Sarah Collins, paid in advance. She also set up a secure storage facility for any personal items you want to retrieve from her house before it's sealed for probate. "Sealed for probate?" my father asked sharply. Mr. Pembroke nodded grimly. "Given the criminal investigation, the court will likely order the property secured until Detective Richardson completes her examination of Marcus's activities. Rose may have hidden additional evidence there." Through the conference room windows, I could see the crowd outside had doubled in size. Someone had set up what looked like a small stage, and a woman in a bright red blazer was speaking into a microphone while pointing at our building. "What's she saying?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Aunt Linda had been watching from a different window. "Something about working families who deserve inheritance justice and educational inequality in Oregon. I think she's turned your situation into a political rally." My phone, still turned off, felt like a ticking bomb. Carol noticed me staring at my purse and pulled out a different device, a basic flip phone that looked like it belonged in 2003. "Your grandmother arranged for this as well. Clean phone number, no data trail connecting it to your identity. The only people who have this number are Mr. Pembroke, myself, and the hotel manager." "This is insane," I whispered. "Grandma really thought I'd need to disappear?" "Rose was a very practical woman," Carol said gently. She'd seen what happened to lottery winners, people who won large court settlements. Sudden wealth makes people targets for everything from investment scams to kidnapping attempts. Uncle Tom's face went pale. Kidnapping? You think Sarah's in physical danger? Probably not, Carol said, but she didn't sound entirely convinced. However, Rose specifically mentioned concerns about Marcus's business associates. She discovered that he owed money to some questionable lenders. Mr. Pembroke looked up from his notes sharply. She never mentioned that to me. It's in her private papers at the house. Apparently Marcus borrowed heavily against expected inheritance to cover his business losses. When Rose found out, she realized he wasn't just stealing, he was desperate. Carol's voice dropped. Desperate people with gambling debts don't always make rational decisions when millions of dollars are involved. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Marcus's conversation with his financial advisor, Jim Patterson. How many people had Marcus told about the expected inheritance? How many of them were counting on money that was never going to come? My mother grabbed my hand. Sarah, maybe you should take a hotel room, just for a few days until this calms down. Before I could answer, Mr. Pembroke's assistant appeared in the doorway again, looking even more frazzled than before. Harold, I'm sorry, but there's been a development. A man named Jim Patterson is downstairs demanding to speak with Marcus Morrison. He's quite agitated and claims Marcus owes his firm $68,000 in consulting fees that were supposed to be paid upon successful estate resolution. The room fell silent except for the muffled sounds of the crowd outside. Patterson's here? I asked. Marcus's financial advisor? He brought documentation, the assistant continued nervously. Contracts showing that Marcus promised him a percentage of his inheritance as payment for estate planning services. He's threatening to file liens against any property Marcus might inherit. Carol was already reaching for her phone. Mr. Pembroke, I think we need to contact Detective Richardson immediately. If Patterson was expecting payment from Marcus's inheritance, he may have been complicit in the theft. But I was thinking about something else entirely. Marcus had been so confident during the will reading, so certain he was about to inherit the bulk of Grandma's estate. What if his desperation went deeper than family manipulation? What if he'd made promises to dangerous people based on money he thought was guaranteed? And what if those people were about to find out that the money was now mine? The flip phone in my hand suddenly felt like a lifeline, and the idea of disappearing to the riverside was starting to sound less like paranoia and more like common sense. Outside, someone started chanting tax the rich, and I realized my inheritance had officially become a public spectacle that was spiraling completely beyond anyone's control. The Riverside Inn turned out to be a small boutique hotel tucked away in the Pearl District, the kind of place that catered to business travelers who valued discretion over luxury. Carol had driven me there in her silver Lexus, taking a deliberately circuitous route through downtown Portland to make sure we weren't followed. The media vultures will lose interest in a day or two, she assured me as we pulled into the hotel's underground garage. There's always a newer story, something more scandalous to chase. But even as she said it, the burner phone was buzzing with messages from Mr. Pembroke. Jim Patterson had apparently barricaded himself in the law office lobby, demanding to speak with whoever inherited Marcus Morrison's rightful assets. Hotel security had been called when he started shouting about fraudulent will manipulation and threatening to expose the whole conspiracy. Room 314 was modest but clean, with blackout curtains that I immediately drew shut. Carol had arranged for basic necessities, toiletries, a change of clothes, even a selection of comfort foods that made me wonder if Grandma Rose had specified those details too. Everything felt surreal, like I was playing a character in someone else's life. The burner phone rang at exactly 6:47 p.m. Mr. Pembroke's voice was tense. Sarah, there's been a development with Patterson. Detective Richardson arrested him an hour ago for attempted extortion, but not before he made some very troubling claims. I sank onto the hotel bed, exhaustion hitting me like a physical weight. What kind of claims? He's alleging that Marcus showed him forged documents proving Rose was mentally incompetent. According to Patterson, Marcus hired him specifically to challenge any will that didn't leave the majority of assets to Marcus. Mr. Pembroke paused. But here's the concerning part, Patterson claims he has recordings of Marcus discussing contingency plans if illegal challenges failed. What kind of contingency plans? Patterson wouldn't elaborate, but he kept mentioning something about Rose's house and overlooked assets. Detective Richardson thinks Marcus may have hidden additional stolen money or documents somewhere on the property. Through the hotel room's thin walls, I could hear a television in the neighboring room broadcasting what sounded like news coverage. I caught fragments, inheritance controversy. Criminal investigation. Teacher turned millionaire. Mr. Pembroke, what if I just give it all away? Tonight. Transfer everything to the scholarship fund and walk away from this whole mess? Sarah, Rose specifically included provisions preventing hasty divestment. Any major financial decisions require a 72-hour waiting period and consultation with 3 independent advisors. She was protecting you from exactly this kind of pressure. Of course she was. Grandma Rose had thought of everything except how lonely it would feel to be trapped in a hotel room, afraid to turn on my real phone, while strangers debated my worthiness on social media. The burner phone buzzed with a text from Carol, house search scheduled for tomorrow at 8 a.m. Detective Richardson wants you present in case they find anything requiring immediate decisions. Can arrange secure transport. I typed back, what kind of things? Her response came quickly, hidden safes, additional documentation, or evidence of other victims. Patterson's arrest suggests this may be bigger than just your grandmother. Other victims. The word sent ice through my veins. What if Marcus and Patterson had been running this scheme on multiple elderly clients? What if Grandma Rose's careful documentation had exposed a whole network of financial exploitation? The television next door got louder, and I heard my name clearly. Sarah Morrison, the Portland teacher who inherited over $2 million, has not been available for comment. Sources close to the investigation suggest there may be additional criminal charges pending. I turned off the burner phone and sat in the dark hotel room, listening to strangers discuss my life like I was a fictional character. Somewhere across town, Marcus was probably sitting in a police station, finally facing consequences for his choices. Jim Patterson was in jail, his elaborate schemes unraveling. And I was hiding in a hotel, wondering if accepting my grandmother's final gift was going to destroy everything I'd worked to build. The scholarship fund felt like a distant dream compared to the immediate nightmare of my life becoming a public spectacle. But maybe that was exactly why Grandma Rose had planned for this chaos. She knew that doing the right thing was rarely easy, and sometimes it required surviving the storm before you could see the clear sky. The house search started at dawn. Detective Richardson had called the burner phone at 6:30 a.m., her voice crisp and professional. "Ms. Morrison, we're moving the timeline up. We received credible information that someone attempted to break into your grandmother's house last night. I met Carol and the detective team at 12:47 Maple Street at exactly 8 a.m., my stomach churning with anxiety and too much hotel coffee. Grandma Rose's Victorian looked smaller somehow in the gray morning light, its cheerful yellow paint seeming faded and vulnerable. The attempted break-in was sophisticated, Detective Richardson explained as we walked up the front steps. Professional lock picks, disabled security system. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were looking for. Did they get in? Carol asked, consulting her ever-present leather portfolio. No. The neighbor's dog started barking around 2 a.m., and Mrs. Chen from next door called it in. But here's the interesting part, we found surveillance equipment hidden in the bushes across the street. Someone's been watching this house for at least a week. The key felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked Grandma Rose's front door. The house smelled like her lavender sachets and the lemon oil she used on her furniture, so familiar it made my chest tight. Everything looked exactly as it had during my last visit 6 weeks ago, her reading glasses folded on the side table, yesterday's crossword puzzle still half finished on the kitchen counter. Sarah, Detective Richardson said gently, we're specifically looking for any safes, lockboxes, or unusual hiding places your grandmother might have used. According to Patterson's statement, Marcus told him Rose kept important documents somewhere in the house that weren't in her bank's safety deposit box. I led them through the familiar rooms, pointing out the obvious places, the small safe in her bedroom closet, which contained only jewelry and birth certificates, the filing cabinet in her home office, already reviewed by Mr. Pembroke, the hope chest in the guest room, full of quilts and photo albums. But as we searched, I kept thinking about Grandma Rose's habits, her little quirks that outsiders wouldn't know. She always kept spare house keys in a fake rock by the back porch. She had Christmas presents in the basement storage room behind her canning supplies. She tucked important recipes inside her cookbook covers. Detective Richardson, I said suddenly, did Marcus ever help with household repairs when he visited? According to our interviews, he frequently offered to fix things around the house. Why? I headed toward the basement, my heart pounding. Grandma Rose complained last Christmas that Marcus had fixed her basement light switch, but she couldn't figure out how to turn on the workshop lights anymore. The basement workshop had been Grandpa's domain decades ago, barely touched since he died 12 years earlier. The light switch Marcus had supposedly repaired looked normal, but when I examined it more closely, I realized it was actually a dummy switch installed over the original. This isn't connected to anything, I told Detective Richardson. But look, I wiggled the switch plate, and it came loose, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside was a small digital recorder and a manila envelope thick with documents. Detective Richardson pulled on latex gloves before carefully extracting the items. The envelope contained photocopies of bank statements, forged signatures, and what looked like a handwritten list of names and dollar amounts. Jesus, she muttered, scanning the list. There are 8 different names here. Eleanor Hoffman, $45,000. Robert Chen, $23,000. Margaret Foster, $67,000. Those are other victims, Carol said grimly. Marcus and Patterson were running this scheme on multiple elderly clients. But Detective Richardson was staring at the digital recorder with a strange expression. This is voice-activated. It's been recording everything. She looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Your grandmother turned her own basement into a surveillance station. The recordings, when we played them back on Detective Richardson's equipment, were devastating. Hours of Marcus's voice during his weekly visits, often talking on the phone with Patterson about managing the old lady's expectations and keeping her confused about the missing money. Worse, there were conversations with other people, names I didn't recognize, discussing similar schemes targeting lonely old folks with substantial assets and no financial oversight. This isn't just theft, Detective Richardson said, fast-forwarding through hours of audio. This is organized elder abuse on a massive scale. Your grandmother documented everything. The final recording was Grandma Rose's own voice, speaking directly to the device. If anyone finds this, it means I'm gone and Sarah has inherited the mess I've uncovered. Marcus has been stealing from me for 18 months, but more importantly, he's been stealing from at least 7 other elderly people in Portland. I have evidence of forgery, financial manipulation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Sarah, sweetheart, I'm sorry to leave you with this burden, but these people need justice, and you're the only one I trust to see it through. I sank onto Grandpa's old workbench, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we discovered. This wasn't just about my inheritance anymore. There were other families out there, other grandparents who'd been manipulated and stolen from by people they trusted. Detective Richardson was already on her radio, calling for additional units and a crime scene team. The house was about to become the center of a major criminal investigation that would probably take months to unravel. And somehow, I was going to be right in the middle of all of it. The burner phone started ringing nonstop around noon. Carol had returned to the hotel with me after Detective Richardson sealed off the house as an active crime scene, and now we were fielding calls from agencies I'd never heard of. Oregon Elder Abuse Task Force wants to interview you about the recordings, Carol said, hanging up from the 4th call in 20 minutes. Adult Protective Services has opened investigations into all 8 victims on Rose's list. And the FBI's white-collar crime unit is now involved because Patterson's firm operated across state lines. I stared out the hotel window at downtown Portland, watching normal people go about their Thursday afternoon routines, grabbing coffee, walking dogs, complaining about traffic. None of them knew that their city had just uncovered one of the largest elder abuse conspiracies in Oregon history. How many more victims do they think there are? I asked. Detective Richardson estimates at least 20, possibly more. Patterson kept detailed client files going back 3 years. Carol's phone buzzed with another message. They're setting up a victim hotline tomorrow. Channel 8 is calling it Operation Golden Trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. 24 hours ago, I'd been hiding from media attention about my inheritance. Now that same media attention was helping expose Marcus and Patterson's crimes to potential victims who didn't even know they'd been robbed. My stomach churned as I thought about elderly people across the Pacific Northwest discovering that their trusted financial advisors had been systematically stealing from them. How many of them had been gaslit like Grandma Rose? How many had died thinking their minds were failing when their money simply disappeared? The burner phone rang again. This time it was Mr. Pembroke, his voice tight with stress. Sarah, we have a problem. Marcus made bail an hour ago. What? How is that possible? His wife Jennifer posted bond using their house as collateral. But here's the concerning part, Patterson's attorney claims Marcus wasn't the ringleader. According to their defense strategy, Marcus was just another victim, manipulated by Patterson into participating in the scheme. I felt the room spinning. They're claiming Marcus was a victim? It gets worse. Patterson's lawyer filed a motion claiming Rose's will should be invalidated because it was created under duress from criminal associates. They're arguing that Rose only left you the inheritance because she was being threatened by unknown conspirators. Carol had gone pale. That's absurd. Rose documented everything voluntarily. I know that, and you know that, but Patterson's defense team is sophisticated. They're claiming the basement recordings were manufactured evidence, that Rose was coerced into creating false documentation to frame innocent financial advisors. Mr. Pembroke's voice was grim. They've requested an emergency hearing to freeze all estate assets until the criminal investigation concludes. The hotel room felt like it was closing in. I'd spent the morning thinking I was helping bring justice to elderly victims of financial abuse. Now it turned out that same investigation might invalidate Grandma Rose's will and leave me with nothing. How long could a freeze last? I asked weakly. Months. Possibly years if Patterson's team drags it through appeals. Mr. Pembroke paused. Sarah, there's something else. Jennifer Morrison called my office an hour ago. She wants to meet with you. Marcus's wife? Why? She claims Marcus confessed everything to her last night. She says she has information about Patterson's operation that could help the prosecution, but she'll only share it with you directly. His voice dropped. She specifically asked me to tell you it's about protecting Emma, Marcus's daughter. In all the chaos of criminal investigations and frozen assets, I'd forgotten about the 4-year-old girl whose father was facing federal fraud charges and whose mother was threatening to leave him. Where does she want to meet? Pioneer Courthouse Square, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Public location, daytime crowd. She's scared of Patterson's associates and doesn't trust police protection yet. Carol was shaking her head vigorously. Sarah, this could be a setup. If Marcus made bail, he might have convinced Jennifer to help him manipulate you into dropping the charges. But I kept thinking about Emma, a little girl who was about to grow up knowing her father was a criminal, that her family's money had been stolen from elderly victims, that her last connection to her great-grandmother was tainted by fraud and betrayal. Maybe Jennifer really did have information that could help. Or maybe she just wanted to beg me not to destroy what was left of her family. Either way, I owed it to that little girl to find out. I'll meet with her, I said finally. But Carol, I want you there too. And I want Detective Richardson to know about it in advance. The burner phone buzzed with a news alert, breaking, federal investigation expands in Portland elder abuse case. Local teacher's inheritance at center of multi-state fraud ring. My inheritance wasn't just about me anymore. It was evidence in a federal case that could protect dozens of elderly victims or, if Patterson's defense succeeded, let the whole conspiracy disappear behind legal technicalities. Tomorrow's meeting with Jennifer might be my only chance to learn the truth about how deep this conspiracy really went. Pioneer Courthouse Square was bustling with the usual Thursday afternoon crowd, food cart vendors, street musicians, and office workers grabbing late lunches. I spotted Jennifer immediately. She was sitting on a bench near the fountain, bouncing Emma on her lap while anxiously scanning the crowd. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the exhaustion etched into her face. Carol had positioned herself at a coffee cart with a clear view of the meeting spot, while Detective Richardson's partner sat reading a newspaper on a nearby bench. The whole setup felt like something out of a spy movie, except the stakes were my family's shattered trust and potentially millions of dollars in stolen money. Sarah, Jennifer said when I approached, her voice barely audible over the fountain. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Emma looked up at me with Marcus's dark eyes, clutching a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. She was beautiful, all curly hair and chubby cheeks, and completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding her family. Jennifer, what did you want to tell me? I sat down carefully, maintaining some distance but close enough to hear her over the city noise. Marcus lied to you. To everyone. She shifted Emma to her other knee, her hands trembling slightly. The financial trouble didn't start with a miscarriage. It started 2 years before that, when Marcus got involved in cryptocurrency investments with Patterson's firm. My stomach dropped. Cryptocurrency? Patterson convinced Marcus to invest our savings in some blockchain startup that was supposed to guarantee massive returns. $50,000, everything we had for Emma's college fund and our house down payment. Jennifer's voice was bitter. The whole thing was a Ponzi scheme. When it collapsed, Patterson told Marcus he could help him recover the losses through creative estate planning. That's when he started targeting elderly clients? Patterson had a whole system. He'd identify older people with substantial assets but limited family oversight, widows, childless seniors, people whose adult children lived far away. Marcus would build relationships with them, gain their trust, then gradually convince them they needed financial protection from scams. Jennifer wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The sick part is, he actually believed he was helping them at first. Emma had started fussing, reaching for a pigeon that was eyeing someone's dropped sandwich. Jennifer automatically began the practiced bouncing motion of an experienced mother. But Jennifer, Marcus stole over $127,000 from my grandmother alone. That's not helping, that's systematic theft. I know. God, I know. Jennifer's voice cracked. By the time I found out what was really happening, Marcus was in too deep. He owed Patterson's firm money, he owed the cryptocurrency people money, and he'd made promises to our mortgage company about upcoming inheritance funds to avoid foreclosure. The pieces were clicking into place with horrible clarity. Marcus hadn't just been greedy, he'd been desperate, trapped in an expanding web of debt and false promises. Sarah, there's something else. Patterson didn't just work with Marcus. Jennifer leaned closer, lowering her voice. There are 4 other estate specialists working the same scheme across Oregon and Washington. Your grandmother's recordings? They're going to bring down the entire network. How do you know all this? Because Patterson called Marcus last night after he made bail. He's panicking about the federal investigation, and he offered Marcus $50,000 to recant his confession and claim the recordings were fabricated. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Marcus almost said yes, Sarah. We're about to lose our house, Emma's preschool, everything. 50,000 would have bought us time to figure something out. I felt sick. But he didn't take it? No, because I told him I'd take Emma and disappear if he destroyed one more elderly person's life to save his own. Jennifer stood up abruptly, settling Emma on her hip. I'm leaving him, Sarah. I'm filing for divorce and full custody tomorrow. But I wanted you to know that Marcus kept detailed records of everything Patterson told him to do. Names, dates, amounts, it's all in a safety deposit box at Columbia Bank under both our names. She pulled a small brass key from her purse and pressed it into my hand. Box 347. Give this to Detective Richardson. Maybe it'll help the other victims get their money back. Jennifer's voice was steady now, resolved. And Sarah? Your grandmother was the only one who fought back. She's the reason this whole thing is going to stop. As Jennifer walked away with Emma, disappearing into the downtown crowd, I realized the investigation was about to get much bigger and much more dangerous for everyone involved. 6 months later, I stood in the auditorium of Roosevelt High School, watching Marcus take a podium for his victim impact testimony. He looked different, thinner, older, his expensive suits replaced by a simple gray jacket that Jennifer had probably picked out before their divorce was finalized. Detective Richardson had worked out a plea agreement, full cooperation with the federal investigation in exchange for reduced charges and the possibility of eventually making restitution to his victims. My name is Marcus Morrison, he began, his voice barely carrying to the back of the room, and I stole $127,000 from my grandmother, Rose Morrison, by convincing her she was losing her mind. The auditorium held 43 elderly victims of Patterson's network, plus their families, FBI agents, and members of the Oregon Elder Abuse Task Force. Jennifer sat in the front row holding Emma, who was quietly coloring in a Dora the Explorer book, oblivious to the weight of her father's words. Patterson's firm targeted seniors with 3 specific vulnerabilities, Marcus continued, reading from prepared remarks that his lawyer had probably vetted extensively. Social isolation, recent health scares, and adult children who lived more than 2 hours away. We called them golden geese, people with substantial assets and limited oversight. I sat with the Morrison family in the 3rd row, still struggling to reconcile this broken man with a competent cousin who'd assumed he was inheriting millions just 6 months ago. The federal investigation had uncovered 67 victims across 5 states, with total losses exceeding $8.3 million. Patterson was facing 127 counts of fraud and would likely spend the rest of his life in federal prison. The recording equipment my grandmother installed caught me admitting that I'd stolen from Eleanor Hoffman and Robert Chen, Marcus said, his voice strengthening slightly. Mrs. Hoffman lost her late husband's pension fund, $43,000 that was supposed to cover her medications. Mr. Chen had to sell his house because I convinced him his investment accounts had been compromised by identity thieves. Eleanor Hoffman, 87 years old and sitting with her daughter, wiped tears from her eyes. The Federal Victims Compensation Fund would eventually restore most of the stolen money, but the emotional damage was irreversible. Marcus looked directly at me for the first time since taking the stand. My grandmother left her inheritance to my cousin Sarah because she knew Sarah would use it to help people instead of destroying them. The Rose Morrison Education Foundation has already provided full scholarships to 18 students whose families couldn't afford college. That part was true. Working with Carol Stevens and a team of educational advisors, I'd established the scholarship fund exactly as Grandma Rose had dreamed. The foundation focused on first-generation college students from working families, kids like my 4th-grade students who had big dreams but limited resources. Each scholarship covered 4 years of tuition, plus support for books, housing, and emergency expenses. Sarah could have walked away from this investigation, Marcus continued. She could have taken the money and disappeared. Instead, she spent 6 months working with federal agents to make sure every victim was identified and every stolen dollar was recovered. When Marcus finished his testimony, the judge asked if any family members wanted to make statements. I stood up, my hands shaking slightly. Your Honor, my grandmother always said money was just paper unless you used it to take care of people. Marcus forgot that for a while, but I think he remembers now. I looked at Jennifer and Emma, then back at Marcus. The foundation has set aside funds for Marcus to make full restitution to every victim, plus interest. It won't undo what happened, but it's what Grandma Rose would have wanted. Marcus's eyes filled with tears as the judge announced his sentence, 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised community service working with elder abuse prevention programs. As the courtroom cleared, Jennifer approached with Emma, who was holding up her finished coloring page, a family of 4 stick figures under a rainbow. This is for you, Aunt Sarah, Emma said solemnly. Daddy says you helped catch the bad guys. I knelt down to Emma's eye level, accepting her artwork carefully. Your daddy helped too, sweetheart. He told the truth when it was very hard to do. Later that evening, I drove to Maple Street and parked outside Grandma Rose's house. The yellow Victorian had been restored as the foundation's headquarters, with the basement workshop converted into a computer lab where high school students could get free tutoring and college application help. The fake rock still held spare keys by the back porch. The kitchen window still framed the oak tree where I'd climbed as a child. But now the house buzzed with purpose, teenagers studying for SATs, guidance counselors reviewing scholarship applications, volunteers coordinating mentorship programs. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the latest batch of scholarship thank you letters. Dear Ms. Morrison, because of your grandmother's scholarship, I'll be the first person in my family to graduate from college. The Rose Morrison Foundation changed my life. I promised to help other kids the way you helped me. Marcus had been right about one thing during that horrible reading 6 months ago, the money had completely changed my life. But he'd been wrong about everything else. That money hadn't destroyed me. It had connected me to a community of students, families, and educators who shared Grandma Rose's belief that everyone deserved a chance to reach their potential. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. Scholarship applications for next year are up 340%. We're going to need a bigger headquarters. I smiled, imagining Grandma Rose's reaction to that particular problem. She'd probably suggest buying the house next door and turning it into a study hall. As I drove home to my apartment, I'd kept my teaching job and my modest lifestyle. Despite the inheritance, I passed Pioneer Courthouse Square where Jennifer had handed me the safety deposit box key that broke Patterson's entire network wide open. The title of every news story had been exactly right. When Marcus had shouted that is MY money during the will reading, he'd been completely wrong about who deserved what. The money had never belonged to him. It had belonged to Grandma Rose, and she'd left it to someone she trusted to use it the right way. That money was now helping kids build futures instead of destroying elderly people's dreams. And Marcus? He was learning that the best inheritance you can give someone isn't money, it's the knowledge that they mattered enough to be believed in. Grandma Rose had given that gift to 67 scholarship recipients and counting. It turned out to be worth far more than $2.1 million.